This is part 2 of our lesson on sketching by intercepts. In part 1 we made our foldable, so if you're interested in that you need to find part 1 where we went through all of the different steps on how to find the x-intercepts, y-intercept, and vertex that we need to sketch by intercepts. We're going to do one example and then you're going to do one example on your own. We're going to try sketching the quadratic y equals x squared plus 4x minus 5 using the skills that we talked about in the last video. So in order to sketch by intercepts, you need the x-intercept, the y-intercept, and the vertex. And to find the x-intercepts, you really need to have your quadratic in factored form. So the first thing we want to do is take our x squared plus 4x minus 5 and factor it. So we're going to start by multiplying 1 and negative 5 to get negative 5. And we're going to look for two numbers that multiply to negative 5 and add to our middle term of 4. So there aren't a lot of things that multiply to negative 5, 1 and 5. So if I did positive 5 and negative 1, I think that would give us positive 4 and multiply to negative 5. So I'm going to factor by stretching this out to, let's do the 1 first, negative 1x plus 5x minus 5. And then we're going to group the first two and the last two and common factor, so we can take an x out of the first one and I'm left with x minus 1. I can take a 5 out of the next one and I'm also left with x minus 1. So this is going to factor out to x minus 1, x plus 5. Okay, so to find the x-intercepts are on the y-axis where y equals 0. So what I want to do is take a look at what makes each of those brackets equal 0. So I'm going to set each one equal to 0 and then just solve. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides to get x equals positive 1, and then I'm going to subtract 5 for this one from both sides to get x equals negative 5. And I can go over to my grid and I can mark on positive 1 and negative 5 on the x-axis. Grid lines aren't very dark here. Okay. So next step is the y-intercept. To find the y-intercept, what we do is we take 0 and we sub 0 in for x. So I'm going to use the original equation. So x squared plus 4x minus 5, and everywhere I see an x, we're going to put in a 0. So 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 5. 0 squared is 0. 4 times 0 is 0. And negative 5 is just negative 5. So 0 plus 0 minus 5 is negative 5. So my y-intercept of negative 5 on my graph, I am going to mark on 1, 2, 3, 4, there's negative 5 right there. Okay, so I have my x-intercept, I have my y-intercept. The last thing I need is the vertex. The vertex is found halfway in between your two x-intercepts. So to find the x part of our vertex, we start by finding the midpoint in between our x-intercepts. And how do we do that? You can add the two x-intercepts together. So 1 plus negative 5, and we divide it by 2. So 1 plus negative 5 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Okay, now the vertex has an x and a y part to it, so to find the y part of the vertex, we take our equation. So that was our y equals x squared plus 4x minus 5, and everywhere we see an x, we sub in negative 2. So we're going to do negative 2 squared plus 4 times negative 2 minus 5. Negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. And negative 5 is negative 5. So that's going to give me negative 1 minus 8 is negative 9. So my vertex is going to be at negative 2, negative 9. So on my graph, we're going to find negative 2 and then count down to negative 9. And that gives me my x-intercepts, my y-intercept, and my vertex. Now before I draw in my curve, I am going to mark on one last thing, and that is the mirror point for the y-intercept. I noticed that from the vertex in the middle on the axis of symmetry, it is 2 squares to the right. So I'm going to go 2 squares to the left, and I'm just going to add the mirror point on so that it looks a little bit nicer when I graph it. And then I'm just going to try to draw a nice curve that passes through all of those points, goes all the way to the end of the grid, and looks like a parabola. And don't forget to put your arrows on the ends. And that is the graph of y equals x squared plus 4x minus 5. Now if you flip the page over, there is one for you to do on the back, right here, which is y equals x squared minus 4x. And I would like you at this point to pause the video and see if you can try it yourself. Okay, so let's take a look at what I got when I did the graph. I factored. I ended up with x and x minus 4. They had an x in common. When I set each of those equal to 0, for the 1 I ended up with x equals 0. There wasn't anything to do there, so it's just 0. For x minus 4, I ended up with x equals positive 4. So those were my two x-intercepts. For the y-intercept, I put in 0 to get y equals 0. And for the vertex, I found the midpoint in between the 2 points. So I added 0 and 4 to get 4. I divided by 2 to get 2. And then I took that 2, I subbed it into the equation, and I ended up with a y part of negative 4. So I marked on 0 and 4. I found that my y-intercept was the same as my x-intercept at 0, and then I marked on 2 and negative 4 as the vertex, and I drew in my parabola. So you're going to have to check out the third video to find out how to do the last question.